Richard, I was watching your a video as you talked about your book just yesterday, and I was struck as you began to close out, and you asked the question, what if the racial policies by the FHA had not existed? Where do you think we would be today?
It would be a very different country. This actually gets directly back to the distinction that I was talking to Alexis before about de jure and de facto segregation. Of course, there was private discrimination in this country. Of course, Levitt, the builder of Levittown, to go back to that example, he was a bigot. He was an out-and-out bigot. He said he would never sell a home to an African American if he had the choice. But he didn't have the choice. The Federal Housing Administration guaranteed his bank loans. And if the Federal Housing Administration had told him, you can only build Levittown if you sell homes on a non-discriminatory basis, then Levittown today would be the 15% African American, I'm just estimating that reflects the broader community around it, instead of the 2% African American that the Fair Housing Act accomplished. So of course there was private bigotry, but without federal government control and sponsorship of this, and there were so many other policies besides the FHA and VA, I described many of them in The Color of Law. Without federal policy to create segregation, we wouldn't have it today. We would have a much more integrated society. Public housing, I mentioned a few minutes ago. The federal government in the 1930s took integrated neighborhoods and desegregated them, took integrated neighborhoods and segregated them with separate public housing projects. And this was not just in the North, in the South, rather. I give examples of, a place like Cambridge, Massachusetts thinks of itself as very liberal. The area between Harvard and MIT in the 1930s was an integrated neighborhood, about half white and half black. The federal government destroyed integrated housing in that neighborhood and built two separate projects, one for blacks and one for whites, creating a pattern of segregation in Boston and elsewhere in this country, elsewhere in the metropolitan area that otherwise wouldn't have existed to the extent that it does. So we would have a very different looking country today if it weren't for federal government policy that was exploiting private bigotry to impose and require segregation where it could have required the opposite.